It's a great day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millzy, back with Hometown Commander. And we are back for another episode of Millzy Brews, the show where I brew decks for you on my quest to out-brew your favorite Magic channel. If I'm your favorite Magic channel, then I'm going to somehow out-brew myself. Millzy Brews. It's a show where I put a deck list forward for you. This is my version 1.0 of this deck list. Some of these are based on decks I had before, so they have a little bit of testing, but most of them are going to have no testing, just my first shot at some of these decks on paper. Are they going to be perfect? No, but I'd love to hear what you think of them down in the comments. Let me know what cards you'd add, what cards you'd take out, what cards you think we should change down in the comments section below. Drop me a like if you like my commander choices or if you want to see more, and subscribe to join me on my quest. So our commander today is a pretty fun one. The theme of this week is going to be landfall decks. I have 3 of them queued up for y'all this week, and a couple of these are ones I've been interested in trying out for a long time, brewing for a long time, and I thought, why not have some fun? Probably what I really want to brew from Phyrexian RB1 is over, and so I figured why not fill the next couple weeks we have here until we get into the March of the Machines with some fun deck lists. I have a big long list of decks that I'm going to be brewing up here soon, so definitely stick around for that. But Yarok the Desecrated 2 black, green, blue for a 3/5. Death Touch, lifelink, pretty good stats there. As far as keyword abilities go, then if a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So Yarok is going to double every enter the battlefield type effect we have. So the cool part about Yarok here is we kind of get to take this landfall deck and we get to do 2 sides of the coin. We have all of our landfall triggers that are going to get doubled, and then we have all of our ETB triggers that are going to get doubled. I think this is what makes Yarok pretty versatile, and I hope that it's what makes our deck a lot of fun. We'll start with the lands, playing 34. You'd think as a landfall deck we'd want more than this, but the truth is we're not playing a ton of the graveyard recursion strategies that you play in a lot of other landfall lists. We're really trying to get our creatures down and then use those subtle land drops for our incremental advantage. We're also playing things like Scape Shift and Splendid Reclamation and things like that. It's great. Of course, great combo in most landfall lists. But I think the difference here is we're not trying to farm our graveyard for lands like you would in some other landfall decks that people talk about. My favorite inclusion here is Dark Depths. Dark Depths is such a fun card. I think it works really well in this deck because we can get a pretty cool Merit Lodge token here. We're playing the Thespian Stage as well to get it copied. Of course, if Thespian Stage copies Dark Depths, it'll come in with have no counters on it, and so you sacrifice the original Dark Depths. Thespian Stage is a copy of Dark Depths, then sacrifices itself, and then you get Merit Lodge. So with just the 2 of them, you can skirt around that 30 mana needed to take all 10 counters off of Dark Depths and get us that 20/20 that is going to wreak some havoc. Now, Yarok is a deck that I've been really wanting to brew for a long time. So this deck is probably going to be a little bit more skewed towards something I would try to brew for myself, whereas some of the decks we're going to look at this week aren't. So I am including the Survival of the Fittest because it's a card that I own, and I think it's important for some of Yarok's combos. We're playing a couple creature combos that we'll talk about when we get up to the creatures. So I think the Fittest is important here over the options that we have with some of our tutors like Worldly Tutor or Sylvan Tutor. I like the replayability of Survival of the Fittest, and we are playing Muldrothan here, which is going to help us get back some of those permanents if we need them. Exploration going to double our land drops each turn. Leyland of Anticipation is going to help us play cards on our opponent's turn. Hagra is a great enchantment. It's going to help us drain some of our opponents for life on that bottom building. That's going to go off twice with Yarok out, and it could go off 3 times depending on some of the creatures we have out. Risk Study for draw, Sylvan Library for draw, Zendikar Whirl for those few tokens. Coming into the artifacts, Arcane Signet, Crypt and Soaring. The Crypt's in here because we want to get your rock off fast. Again, we're trying to swing this deck a little bit higher up on the power scale with that Crypt, and we are playing the Urza Saga, which can help us get it. Conduit of Worlds, replacing Crucible of Worlds, just because we can play permanents out of our graveyard, kind of gives us a second copy of Muldrotha in that sense, although we're not allowed to play any other spells, permanent spells, or can't cast any additional spells when we do this. I don't think it's going to matter though, because depending on what we can go get, it's going to make a lot of good. Conjurer's Closet and Panharmonicon are in here because we do have some ETB triggers we'd love to get back again. So we definitely want these. And the cool part about these, of course, Panharmonicon is going to trigger or artifact or creatures in, but we are playing things that are going to hopefully make our creatures into land, so they count for landfall triggers, and then Henge is going to help us draw when things come in. Getting into the spells, you're going to see we're really getting into trying to, and I think the big thing about Conjurer's Closet is it really leans into this, and Panharmonicon, it leans into this being an end of the battlefield deck and not just a landfall deck. So you see we're still trying to keep the deck kind of running parallel on both these strategies if possible. We get to play a decent suite of removal in Assassin's Trophy, Beast Within, and Deadly Rollick. Cycrypt is most of the time removal, especially since we're going to be trying to bounce everything back to our opponent's hand. Crop Rotation. The reason the crop rotation and the Sylvan Scrying are so important in this deck is A, it can go get Dark Depths if that's the route we want to go, or it can go get our Yavimaya or our Urborg. Yavimaya, if we see some of the things in our deck that care about forests. Urborg or Cabal Coffers, if we see the other, we'll turn on that combination and allow us to make a ton of black mana. So these two spells do really kind of help us with that, because they allow us to get into those combo pieces and get into those combo lines. Heroic Intervention for some protection, Worldly, and Vampiric Tutor. The Worldly Tutor's here because we can't just rely on Survival of the Fittest to do that searching for us. We can't just rely on the few tutors we have. Sometimes we really want to go get that integral piece of a creature combo or set something else up depending on where we're at in the game. Saw in Half, one of my favorite new cards, probably the only card from Infinity I ever actually seeing much commander play. Destroy target creature. If that creature dies this way, its controller creates 2 tokens that are copies of that creature, except their base power and toughness is halved. Round up each time. This is a perfect card for Avenger of Zendikar. This is a perfect card for Craterhoof. There's a lot of creatures in this deck that have killer ETB abilities, and Saw in Half is literally perfect and is probably going to push forward to us potentially ending games, depending on what we saw in Half. But it's a very important card, and I think it's going to mean a ton to ending the game. Sorcery's Awaken the Woods, definitely a landfall staple at this point. I think making this many forest land tokens gives you basically X landfall triggers, and then it also just gives you X lands, land tokens for your next turn to use as mana. Awaken the Woods is great. I don't think it particularly matters when you played in the game or how much you pay into it. I think it's always going to pay you off no matter where you're at. D-Tutor for a little bit of searching. Farseek, Into the North, Nature's Law, Rampant Growth, and the 3 visits, all just straight ramp. Finale Devastation going to help us get a creature that either enable a combo or get us a big creature to help kind of push forward for that game ender. Reanimate going to get something back from the graveyard. Writer Replication can make up to 5 copies of something. 1 for 4 mana, 5 for 9 mana. So depending on what situation we're in, this can do us a lot of damage. This could do us a lot of good in certain situations pushing through. Scapeshift and Splendid Reclamation, the classic landfall combo. Scapeshift allowing you to sacrifice any number of lands, search for that many, and put them on the battlefield tapped, and then Splendid Reclamation, bringing all land cards from our graveyard back from the battlefield and tapped. What we're going to try to do here is, with this combo specifically, is use something like Lotus Cobra to still give us mana while we're getting all these landfall triggers and all that kind of thing. And then Torment of Hellfire, another one of our finishers. We're going to have a ton of lands. We're going to have access to a ton of mana, which means we could potentially go really deep on Torment of Hellfire and push our opponents back to hurt them. Before we talk about the creatures, we'll run really quick through the Planeswalkers. Nissa of Shattered Burrows, whenever a land comes in, she gets a loyalty counter. +1 turns a land into a 3/3 with haste and on turn. Then -5 says you may put a creature card with CMC less than or equal to the number of lands you control from your hand or the graveyard with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. This is great because we're already trying to dump a ton of lands in anyway, and this is going to be able to get back things like Craterhoof or Muldrotho or Obnixilis or Yarok if they get killed, or I doubt we put Yarok in the graveyard, but you see what I'm saying, or some of these other really important creatures we're going to talk about when we go through our creatures. Nissa can help us get those back without a Reanimate or without Muldrotha if we don't have access to it. Nissa, Ascended Animus, really the only new card I can think of from Phyrexia We Won, just because it is a finisher in this deck. The +1 is great no matter what it comes down as. It's just going to give us some bodies on the ground, and then that -7 giving a +1/+1 for each forest you control. This is where that Yavi Maya or our Dryad of the Elysian Grove is going to become so important to make all of our forests or all of our lands into forests and kind of pump up the damage we can do with Nissa. And then Renin 7, pretty great because the -3 is going to make us a pretty big token. The +1 can get us lands and put the rest into our graveyard. Hopefully that putting the rest into our graveyard can feed us permanents in for something like Muldrotha if we have it. But worst case scenario, I think what we really want to do is either put a bunch of our lands on the battlefield tapped with a 0 or -3 to make a token or two and just try our best to get some blockers out there or push pressure. I haven't really gone the turns route, to be 100% honest. It's just not something I feel like the deck needs because what we have here is going to create some pretty interesting results. So this creature list is basically half landfall, half ETB strategies. The landfall side of it, we have Ancient Grey Warden allowing us play lands from our graveyard. So this is kind of our replacement for like Ramanop Excavator. We're just going to play the Green Warden and the Crucible, the Conduit of Worlds instead, because Ancient Grey Warden actually does the same, does similar to what Yarok does, but just for land. So it's gonna give us an additional landfall trigger. That's great. Ashaya makes all of our creatures, non-token creatures, into forest lands, and this is great because this is going to help us partially avoid things like Cyclonic Rift, because then all of our creatures are actually lands, so they're not non-land permanents. We can avoid some removal if it says destroy target non-land permanent or exile target non-land permanent, or things like that. Ashaya will help us avoid that. But more often than not, what it is, it just counts all of our non-token creatures as landfall triggers, and that's just going to help push our strategy forward. AOZ, Vendor of Zendikar, comes in, makes a plant for each land we control, and then when land comes in, we put a +1/+1 counter all of them. I like this as a potential finisher on the top end because this is kind of the perfect thing to saw in half, right? You saw it in half, or we blink at the end of the turn with Conjure the Closet or Thassa. Blink it again, get more tokens, blink it, get more tokens, go wide, and set up for a Crater Hoof or even that Nissa to just pump through for a bunch of damage. Coiling Oracle, when it comes in, reveal the top card. If it's a land card, put it on the battlefield. Otherwise, put it in your hand. This is another great Thassa or Conjurer's Closet target trigger because we can just blink it, put it back in. We're also playing Deadeye Navigator, which is going to do a very similar thing, allow us to bounce creatures. The only downside of the only downside of Deadeye Navigator is can only be paired to one creature at a time. So this is kind of cool in the sense that we can only be paired with one creature at a time, but if we pair with the right creature, blinking that creature for 2 mana can become really important. The way Soulbond works is it says you may pair this creature with another unpaired creature when either enters the battlefield. They remain pair for as long as you control both of them. The cool part about that is I believe the way Soulbond works in that sense is that when a new creature comes in, you can have Deadeye Navigator paired to Deadeye Navigator at one time, which is going to allow us to shift around that target. Or worst case, with also we could blink Deadeye Navigator and allow us to change the target that way or get things set up. Deadeye Navigator is not only a great body for 5/5 for 6, but again, allowing us to blink the right thing could become really important depending on what we have set up. Crater Hoof, of course, one of our finishers. Displace your Kent. Whenever we cast a non-creature spell, we get to blink a non-land permanent you control, which is pretty interesting. That could lead to a bunch of cool combos. Dryad, again, makes all of our lands every type. This works for both Cabal Coffers and for Nis on that sense, so this one's pretty important. Eternal Witness getting us something back from our graveyard every time it comes in. This is another great ETB blink target because we could just start getting things back from our graveyard. This does not say permanent, right? Like Nissa did. This says any card from our graveyard back to our hand. So this is great because we can reuse spells. We can reuse a lot of things. Green Sleeves. Just a great thing that's going to pump out tokens for landfall triggers. Of course, it's a star where stars the amount of lands we control, but also whenever a land comes in, we get a 3/3 Badger. This is going to help us, again, just keep going wide, keep putting more pressure on opponents. Lotus Cobra, probably one of the best landfall cards on the deck. Whenever a land enters the battlefield in our control, we get a mana of any color. This is great for those big turns where we're dumping a ton of lands in, or we're bringing lands back, or we're bouncing lands back to our hand and playing them again. There are some lands in our deck that are always going to come in tapped, but with Lotus Cobra, we're going to still get that mana regardless of whether or not it comes in at tap. Massacre Worm, one of my favorite cards we get to play in this deck. Whenever it enters the battlefield, creatures your opponent's control get -2/-2 until end of turn. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, that player loses 2 life. Mask Worm is a ton of fun into a big board because with Yarok out, that's -4/-4 for every creature on the board. And if you can blink this once, like the cool part of this with Thassa is Thassa blinks it at the start of your end step. So what's cool about that with Massacre Worm is you could blink it, come back in again, and that minus if you did it previously in the turn won't have worn off yet. It'll still be there. Massacre Worm is a cool pair with Deadeye Navigator. It's going to help kind of clear your opponent's board side. Gets around Hexproof, gets around Indestructible, gets around a lot of things. So the other fun part about Massacre Worm is if someone has a creature that's pumping the rest of their creatures, as soon as you get rid of that creature that's pumping the rest of their creatures, now all their other creatures are going to go down. Massacre Worm can be a game ender in some sense, depending on what you're playing against. If you're playing against a lot of token decks or a lot of decks where you have creatures with flying that you can't deal with otherwise, I think Massacre Worm's a great target to get. Start blinking it, start taking care of your opponent's things. I think this is another great Saw in Half target as well. Muldrotha, basically just in here to play things out of our graveyard. I think there's a lot of times where things are going to get removed, things are going to get put in the graveyard. If we're playing around running 6 a lot, I think Muldrotha is a great card because if we're putting things in our graveyard, we can get those permanents back. The only bad part about Muldrotha is we cannot cast spells that aren't permanents from our graveyard, but hopefully we have other ways to bring those back with things like Eternal Witness. Up next is the Fallen, another great landfall finisher for the deck. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may have target player lose 3 life. If you do, you put 3 counters on it. The more times this goes off, the less lands it takes for us to hit our opponents out, right? Up next is the Fallen is great for that. I just realized I missed Agent of Treachery. Agent of Treachery, whenever it enters the battlefield, gain control of target permanent. This can hit a lot of things. Of course, remember, when we blink this, we don't lose control of the thing we gained control of. So we could gain control of a lot of things. And if at your end step, if you control 3 more permanents you don't own, you draw 3 cards. This is a great card. This is one of those cards we want to pair with Deadeye Navigator, start taking our opponent's things, get them out of the way. The other thing we don't mind pairing with is Peregrine Drake. There's the battlefield. We untap up to 5 lands. This can go infinite on mana for Torment of Hellfire. This can do a lot of really good things. I have considered throwing like a Tasha's Hideous Laughter, or Exsanguinate in the deck for Peregrine Drake as well that we can go get. So those might be cards you could consider if you want to go a little bit more towns that route. Risen Reef, whenever it or another elemental enters battlefield under your control, look at the top card. If it's a land, put it on the battlefield tapped. If you don't put it battlefield, put it in your hand. Yarok is an elemental, so that works for Risen Reef. But again, Risen Reef probably just bounces itself with Thassa or didn't. So here's another of these ETB targets that we want to bounce and do different things. Sakashima, of course, going to come in and copy Yarok, give us another trigger of all of these. Scoot Swarm, that landfall ability makes it go wide, and it's going to start going pretty wide. This is a great card to start filling up the board for Nissa or Craterhoof or some of these other finishers we have. Spark Double is great because it can copy a rock, or it can copy our Planeswalkers, and it comes down as a non-legendary copy. Sakashima just comes right down and negates the legendary rule. Spark Double just comes in as a non-legendary copy, and that's great because if we Spark Double Yarok and then someone kills the original Yarok, well, then we can recast the original Yarok with no fear of it legendary rule because Spark Double's a non-legendary copy of it. Tediova, just a landfall machine on its own, drawing us cards and gaining us life. We're also playing the new Tediova from Dominaria United because I think it does a similar thing. It's going to make us value as our lands are coming down. This one's going to turn our lands into creatures, which hopefully can get us a little bit more aggressive if we need to be. Thassa, again, just blinking things. Doing good and blinking things, and for 4 mana we can always tap something down if need be. Cool part here is if we have enough mana, we could just tap an entire board down and swing through if we had enough. Tireless Provisioner, one of these great new landfall cards. Every time a land enters the battlefield control, we get a food or a treasure. Most of the time we're taking that treasure, just keeping that mana for later and kind of working that up. Or on a turn where we're scape shifting, Tireless Provisioner is great because when all those new lands come in, we're making treasures for each of them, and then we're being able to use those treasures on that turn, whereas otherwise all those lands would come in tapped and we wouldn't get to use them. And then one of my favorite random picks of the deck is Toxrill. No, Toxrill doesn't get doubled by Yarok. It doesn't do a lot of things, but the thing I like about Toxrill is if the card's left alone for long enough, it's just going to ruin 8 boards. It's a 7/7, and it's going to start hurting our opponent's creatures, giving them -1/-1 counters on them for each slime. They get a slime counter at the end of each turn, not just your turn, each turn. If Toxrill gets left on the board for an entire round or on the table, it's going to start hurting people's game plans. And the ability to just get all of these slug tokens and eventually attack with them or do something with them is definitely something that's going to hurt. some of our opponents. Of the 3 landfall decks that we're going to look at this week, this is the one I'm the most excited to try out. Again, this is a deck that I've messed around with in the past, but to be 100% honest, I don't think I ever found my real line for it. I don't think I ever really found the end game. I think with a lot of the newer cards here, we found a good end game. I really like Nissa in this deck. I think it gives us another out going to win the game. Again, I think with this Peregrine Drake combo, we could look into adding cards like Mind Grind or Tasha's Hideous Laughter to help us end the game if that's the route we can go, because I think there is room for that. I also just think with the amount of mana we have, Mind Grinding or Tasha's for Tasha's isn't an X spell. I'm sorry. I was thinking of Mind Grind or Exsanguinate. These X spells where we could just dump a ton of mana into and hurt our opponents could be pretty good. So if the ETB route of this deck is something you want to go a little more towards, you pull out a little bit of that landfall stuff, bring in some of those spells, and I think they would do really well. Again, you could also play the turns route as well. I haven't really, to be 100% honest, but it's definitely something you could play into. I think I like the more the Obnixilus, the Fallen, the damage type stuff that we can do to just hurt our opponents out. And I like the Agent of Treachery stealing stuff. I just think there's a lot of different routes this deck goes, and that's what makes me like it. But what do you guys think of Yarok? Let me know down in the comments what you think. Again, this deck is something I'm excited to try. If you, like I said, have any comments or what I think you should add or take out of the deck, let me know down in the comments. I love having conversations with you guys down in the comments, and I hope that we get to have some more. Otherwise, that's all I have for you guys, and I will catch you next time.